Two friends, Alan Dale and Jerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Alan lives in PEI and Jerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force Wins, the podcast is the result.
And welcome to Gale Force Wins. I'm Alan Dale, and with me as always, my good buddy from the East End of St. John's, Newfoundland, Jerry Carew. How are you, Jerry?
Alan, it is another fun time for me and you. We've kind of had a little bit of a lull in terms of our recording, and I was only saying this to you earlier today. I miss doing numerous calls with guests, and here we are today doing a recording, and I'm looking forward to having a chat with Mark Norman.
Absolutely, Jerry. Listen, it's not often that you get to bring one of your mentors on the show and hear from them and understand their journey. But I can tell you this, that Mark Norman has always been a good friend to me my entire time in the Navy, and he was a guy that I looked up to as a true, genuine leader, and it's such a privilege to have Admiral Mark Norman on the Gale Force Wins with us today. So, Mark, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Al and Jerry. Really nice to meet you. So, Mark Norman, 57 years old, born in Ottawa, funny enough, but only lived there for about 9 months. My father was an Army officer, so we were moving around a lot. I call Kingston, Ontario my home, but spent most of my adult life on the East Coast, based out of Halifax with the Navy. It's where I met my wife, a Newfoundlander, and our one daughter was born in Halifax, so she's a true blue noser. And we now call Ottawa our home after being posted back here several times as I became more and more senior and wasn't allowed to go to sea anymore, and retired a couple of years ago and decided to stay in Ottawa, although we've still got some roots that we plan to grow out in Newfoundland. So, that's the short version. Really happy, had a great career. Investing now in interesting projects that give me an opportunity to pay back to others or help others, I think, more accurately. Fanatical cyclist, road, mountain. I'm a car nut. That's why I'm, jealous of you, Al, with your 911. We're gonna have to talk about that. It's annoying me. And
I've got a Mazda CX-5. Does that excite you?
There you go. Well, that's exciting too. I
got a Thule on top, so
Oh, well, there you go. That's definite cool points there, Jerry. So that's Mark Norman in about 3 or 4 minutes. There you go.
Mark, I was reading some things about you, and you talked about people at different points in their careers and their life. And one of the statements that you made is respect everybody's journey and understand that everybody's journey is different. Speak to me a little bit about that. Yeah,
so I developed this mantra, I guess, about midpoint in my career. I went through a phase of my own where I was debating whether I wanted to stay in the Navy or not, and it really came down to long-term versus short-term, and obviously turned that corner, and the rest is history, as they say. But
what point, Mark? Sorry, what point were you in your career when you were on that?
Yeah, I was about the 8 to 10 year point, I think.
Okay.
I was in a relationship with my wife. We didn't have kids at the time, but it was starting to think, well, is this what I want to do for the long haul? But why it really started to sink in is the more I would talk to people, or people would come to me as I became more senior in the organization, you realize that, the military, like any large organization, they like to pigeonhole things. They like to organize things and put them in neat little boxes. And you realize that people don't fit in neat little boxes. And although they can be broadly categorized based on a whole range of things, experience, qualifications, et cetera, at the end of the day, these are very personal journeys that people are on. And in the context of leaving the military, or when to leave and under what conditions, that's sort of what started it. And I really I stuck with it, and I realized that it was it was good advice, because as you move on, things just get more complicated, and I really wanted to try and give some useful foundational advice to the people around me when I had the chance.
And Mark, that's an incredible thing. I mean, I have a personal experience with that, because I served under you many times in my career. And there was one thing about you that you seemed to get me. You knew that I wasn't going to fit into a round hole if I was in the square peg. And you understood that. Where did you get that? How did you have that knowledge? You know, where did that come from?
That's a really good question. And I don't know, because I've never really done the forensics. I grew up, as I said, my father was an Army officer, and one of the many things I learned from him was the importance of connecting with people. And he moved me through scouting. He was my scoutmaster for a while, and you just sort of, I think it was out of osmosis. And I'd observe him in social situations, and he was that type of person where he could engage anybody at any level. Far more sophisticated than I am or was, a real intellectual, but at the same time, he could connect with the rank and file, if you will, in a military context, and that translated all through his life, and still to this day, he's long retired and living in Kingston. So I think that was part of it, and I also thought the other big contributor was I didn't like, and you would have experienced this, Al, you know, the military can be a very rigid organization, and it really struggles with recognizing the value of the individual as compared to you just being a number. And that it always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And as I progressed through the organization, I just made it a bit of a philosophy, if you will, that I would try and make the experience of those people around me a personal experience, because I was convinced that the more people enjoyed what they were doing, the more you were going to get out of them.
Mark, sorry, I got to jump in there. It's interesting, you know, in my own leadership, one of the things that I did find taxing and frankly tiring was the idiosyncrasies. And as a leader, you try to package everybody together, and it just does not work. And probably that's what made me tired, is trying to package everybody. So it's interesting. I really appreciate how you are approaching this conversation, and you know, listening to Alan talk and how you did that with Alan, and very interesting.
Yeah, Mark. I mean, you definitely hit the nail on the head. If that's what you were trying to achieve, you certainly achieved it. I remember another story, and I'm certain you don't remember it, but I was on the bus going into work in Ottawa, and you got on the bus stop, and you saw me sitting there. You came right over and you sat down next to me, and you struck up a conversation. Like, you know, you were the head of the Navy at the time, I believe, and I was working down in some staff job in a little felt cubicle next to fetus. It was a terrible time in my life. You can only imagine. But you just warmed up right next to me. And one thing that you said to me, and again, you probably won't remember, but you said to me, you know, all of this stuff, Al, me being the Admiral, it's just temporary. I'm still Mark Norman. And I remember you telling me that, and it resonated with me that you got it. Like you understood that this is all about people. There's got to be some grounding at home, some good Newfoundland grounding around that too, right?
Yeah, it is. And you know, you got to realize, and with two strong women in my immediate family, I was reminded on a regular basis that, hang on a second, you're not the captain here. You're not the Admiral here. You know, and as much as I would try, and if they were here, they would say that I was a pain in the ass. But, you know, at the end of the day, I realized that, you know, it's all about that human touch. And, you know, it's interesting because we all have mentors, right? We all have our own experiences. And a couple of things contributed to that. And one was a former, another Admiral, you know, Dean McFadden, yep, who said to me at one point, he said, Mark, you know, don't let your ego get too close to your job. And recognizing, especially in a military organization, that you're continuously moving. And then when I was really fortunate, and I mean that, it was humbling to take over the Navy in 2013, I went down the hallway, and you may recall, so the office, they had the pictures of every chief of the Navy since 1910, Admiral Kingsmill, when the Royal Canadian Navy was established. And I went down the hall and I counted out the pictures. And I said, and I went, 33 was my predecessor. And so I went to somebody, I said, go back and just check to make sure that there's been 33 chiefs of Navy. Oh, yes, sir. And they went away and they did it. And so when I stepped into the role, I identified myself as number 34, Commander number 34, Charlie 34, whatever you want to call it. And initially people were like, what are you talking about? And I talked about chapter 34 of the story of the Royal Canadian Navy. Up front, recognizing that, look, I'm a temporary custodian of this institution. There was a 33, there's going to be a 35, there's going to be 30, we're on 37 now. It just, things move on. But that was a function of this attitude that I developed, where you try not to get too close. And of course, when I was in command of HMCS St. John's, one of the happiest times in my naval life, I got really sick, you may remember. And so I had to leave command to get treated for cancer. And when that happened, you realize, if you didn't realize it already, that puts things in perspective, and you realize, okay, look, we're only on this planet temporarily. We're only doing whatever we're doing temporarily. Everything is in transition. So, don't get too hung up on what you do and where you are and what your circumstances are, if at all possible, because nothing lasts. Yeah.
Mark, you talk about HMCS St. John's. I recall there's a fair amount of Newfoundlanders on that ship, always have been, and I'm sure there always will be. Tell me about that, Mark. You got ill when you were in command of St. John's. Speak to the warm embrace that the ship's company must have given you at that time.
Oh, well, I mean, it was inspiring. It was shock initially, like anybody. And I think it's too bad you can't hear their version, but I'll tell it on their behalf. But there was a sense of they were really sad, and they were worried about me and worried about the family, and it was just it hit them, and as a result, they were cheering for me, and I remember that was Snowmageddon in Halifax back in 2003, 2004, and they White Wand, and they came out and helped, and because I was in the middle of treatments, and they were helping Bev with the shoveling, like just those kinds of things. It was absolutely inspiring, and so I was that much more motivated to be the best captain I could be when I got back to the job, even though some of them had moved on and they were doing other things. But it was this sense of team and community that really stuck with me. And it was a very similar feeling to what happened a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Mark, how long, sorry, I don't know that story in 2003, 2004. How long were you out of command of the HMC of St. John's? How long was that?
Yeah, I think from it was pretty quick. It was long in the context of what is typically a 2-year command. It was about 9.5 months. So from diagnosis until I was declared fit, the military has some pretty stringent medical requirements that you even though you may say you feel good, until they're satisfied that you're fully fit, you're not going to go back. And it makes sense for the institution. But yeah, so it was a chunk of time, but a good friend of mine was appointed in my absence, and he was really good about it. He'd already had command, so he had nothing to prove. And we're really good friends. And he said, look, this is your command, your ship. I'm just going to keep it warm for you. And, he was a man of his word. So, it was a defining experience. I learned a lot from that.
Mark, what was it like crossing the brow when you came back to command? I mean, cancer behind you, such as it is, and how did that when they piped the side for you coming across? How did that feel?
I mean, I was choked. We did the change of command in St. John's.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, Bev's family was there. I was an emotional wreck. Al, you know me, I'm a bit of a softie. So yeah, no, I was just a ball of tears and emotion. But that's the human side of it, right? It goes back to what you said a few minutes ago. There's a time and a place for rigid structure, and there's also a time and a place to be a human being. And I think in hindsight, the troops knew who I was, and that was a reflection of how I felt. So I was being honest. Yeah.
Big connection to Newfoundland there still, isn't there? You talked a little bit earlier about laying some roots there. Tell me about what is about Newfoundland that pulled you in. You're a guy from Ontario.
Yeah,
so what is it about Newfoundland?
I'm the classic come from away, right? In fact, I remember as a kid, we moved. It's not Newfoundland, but we moved to Nova Scotia, which when you're from Ontario is the end of the world, right?
Right.
And I remember my mom. We were driving out. I was 9 or 10 years old at the time. Mom was in tears. You're driving through New Brunswick. You think you literally have gone to the end of the world. And it was the first time I've ever heard the term Upper Canadian. And I had to, Dad being the guy he is, he made me read the history book and figure out what it was all about. And I realized, but they weren't saying it as in Upper Canadian from history. It was like, oh, this was a pejorative term. Yeah. So you fast forward to Newfoundland, and of course, I am the textbook CFA and mainlander, and it's everything that I mean, it's the culture, it's the warmth and the friendliness. There's a physical beauty to it for a few weeks of the year. And a couple months of the year, and I mean, as you know, it's a rough place to be in the middle of the North Atlantic for the winter in particular. But it just is it's a place of physical beauty and of community and just a cultural warmth. And when I'm surrounded by it with Bev's family, it's hard to ignore it. And I'm the butt of a lot of jokes, and I'm okay with that. I don't mind. I play it up. I don't like all my vegetables cooked in the same pot. I know that's absolute sacrilege. But
I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I don't like cabbage. So
there you go. So other than that, I embrace the whole culture, and we've taken a few of our mainland friends with us up to George Street Music Festival, back, actually it was the last one before, the pandemic. Hit. And it's good. And I can see us going back and forth more regularly while we're able to do so and we're healthy.
Mark, you remind me of a quick story. I used to get my hair cut at Central Barbershop down on Duckworth Street. I can't remember the name of the gentleman that owned it, but I was probably in my early 20s getting my hair cut there. And he, in the conversation, said he's from Montreal. And I said, oh, you're not a Newfoundlander. Listen here, son. He said, I've been here for 50 years and it was my choice to come. I'm more of a Newfoundlander than you are. I remember that story. That was probably 40 years ago. I will not forget that story.
But isn't it funny? And it's an East Coast thing, this whole, where are you from? Well, there's only one way to answer, because I've tried and I've realized through my errors that you have to tell them where you were born.
That's right.
Because the rest of it is just noise. They're not interested. They're not really asking where you're from. They're asking, where were you born? Yeah. And so, I get smacked around a few times. But yeah, it's funny. It doesn't matter how long you've lived in a place. If you're not from there, you're not from there.
Mark, just want to back up a little bit. And you said something that really piqued my interest. You said, Alan, I'm a softie. I'm curious, as a leader myself, I've got a soft side. What my challenge has always been, when do you show that? If you always show it, some take advantage. Can you just explore that a little bit? It's obvious you're a people person, but how do you avoid those that might take advantage and then take you for granted as a leader?
Wow.
That's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah. but it's a really good one. I think that let's look at this from a conditions perspective. So when is it advantageous, and when would it not be, or when would it be disadvantageous to show that human side? You don't want to show it when the chips are down and there's people are really looking to you. Imagine situations, very demanding operational situations where they're looking to you for leadership. They're looking to you for strength, direction. They know you're a human, but they're at that point, they're looking for a warrior. They're looking for somebody who's going to make the right decisions, going to keep them safe, and get them home. When would it be appropriate? Well, the other time, then I would say there's another time when it's not appropriate. And that's when it's if you're trying too hard to empathize with the people that you're leading, you got to be really careful that you don't overplay it, because they'll see through it. So this is why it's so important, as I said a few minutes ago. It's just got to be genuine. It has to be honest.
But Mark, that's that's not easy to do, though, because as the leader, you're always on display. And if you make that mistake, it's kind of hard to not cover it up, but change it, or change the perception,
Yeah. And so, and Al will remember, some of the stuff you're taught early in your life as a young officer. You want to be, they're not looking for friends. They're looking for leaders, and they're not looking for best buddies or any of that kind of stuff. And equally, they want you to be human, so that they can relate to you. But that's a longer investment. I don't want it to sound transactional.
No.
But when you're in whatever the moment is that you're dealing with, then it really is circumstantial. The deeper investment that's when you're investing in the people, you're investing in the organization, and you're hoping for a longer return, which you may never actually see. Like, you as the leader may never see the benefit of that. The stuff Al's talking about, it's paying it forward in simple terms, right? Treat people how you would want to be treated, that kind of stuff. Sure, it has an immediate impact up front with whatever it is you're dealing with, but it will have a longer term impact, because those people will then hopefully have learned what right looks like, and they'll pass it on going forward. I'm kind of evading the question because it's such a hard one to answer, and it really is a personal thing. And don't be scared. That's the other piece, is don't be scared to be human. There's a big difference between being a competent manager and being an effective leader. And if you can combine the two, that's gold. But not all competent managers are great with their people. Do you know what I mean? It's not the same thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I've experienced it, and I guess it's why there's so many books written about it. But when you have someone like yourself on board on this podcast, it's a question that I feel compelled to ask, and I think you've answered it as well as you can without having a 3-hour discussion. But it's an important question for a lot of the leaders that are watching our podcast.
Yeah, and I guess the other part is, you've got to listen too. And listening isn't necessarily, with your ears. It's observing and internalizing and getting a sense of how is this going? Is now the time, to be the person who pulls them up by their bootstraps, or is now the time to show that human touch? What's you got to feel the room, right? As
Yeah.
performers would say. Some jokes work really well in some scenarios and other jokes don't. The same joke may not work in a different environment. Right?
Yeah. Mark, I have always admired your sense of optimism. I only ever knew you to be a guy that could only see the opportunities and the excitement of what was over the horizon. And then I would try to understand that in the context of where you were in time. How do you keep that sense of optimism when you were leading the institution and you were, in essence, planting trees, the shade of which you would never sit beneath? How do you keep excited about big projects that are over the horizon that are now coming to fruition, of course? But how did you keep that sense of optimism up and keep everybody around you engaged?
Well, I guess there's two dimensions to that, Al. There's the very personal dimension, which is that my optimism I would tend to ration my optimism for work, okay? Which meant that unfortunately, there wasn't as much to go around at home. And so that is something, if there were regrets looking back, that would be one of them. But I'm still with the same amazing woman I have been for 30 years, and our daughter's almost 26, and she's an incredible woman in her own right. But the point is, I could be a bit of an asshole because I was giving more than my fair share of optimism to my job and the institution. That's the personal side of it. The professional side of it is this issue of the higher purpose, the greater good, service before self. These are like, they sound like real buzzwords and terms, but ultimately, I knew that I only had a finite period of time, and that I gave this advice to somebody just the other day, actually, a senior naval officer. We were talking about something, and I got it from my father. I go back to Boy Scouts, right? Always leave the campsite in better shape than you found it. Simplest advice you can be given. It applies to anything in life, and if you're prepared to do that, both literally and metaphorically or philosophically, then you're going to be healthy yourself, because you're just setting reasonable expectations, right? It's not like I'm going to build the best campsite ever seen. No, I'm going to leave it in better shape than I found it. That is manageable expectations. Yeah. And it also ensures that there's this continuous improvement, right? Yeah. You don't worry about legacies. I saw enough people, I'm sure you did, I'm sure, Jerry, in your own life, you've seen people who they're already thinking about what their legacy is the day they start the job. And that's different from having a bunch of things you want to get done. That's completely different. But when you start measuring it through the wrong lens, then you're going to have problems. So, I mean, what wasn't to be optimistic about? I mean, God, at the time, 103-year-old institution. I was the 34th guy in Canadian history to have the opportunity to lead the institution. We had some serious challenges, and there always will be challenges, but we had some great opportunities to, like you said, starting to build the Arctic offshore patrol ships, where the paper design was on my desk. I remember it vividly. And at some point, I'll be able to walk on board and go, hey, that's pretty cool. I had something to do with this. So there you go. Let's keep it in perspective.
And that's absolutely amazing. You're right. I mean, there's so much to be excited about, isn't there? I mean, my son joined the Navy recently, and I'm a little bit envious as I look at what the horizon looks like for him. I remember, as do you, walking on board the Canadian patrol frigate, the Halifax class, when they were brand new. They had that new car smell.
Right. They still had the plastic on the seats. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
And what, I mean, I was overwhelmed, like to think that I get an opportunity to be a part of this, to drive this or work the weapon systems. And I look at my son now, and I look at what's on the horizon, whether it is Arctic offshore patrol vessels or the Canadian Surface Combatant Joint Service Support, all of that. It's just an incredibly exciting time to think what his next 25 or 30 years will look like. And you're right. What's not to be excited about?
Right. And you look beyond the Navy and our own experience, and you look at, this is nation building, right? Like this is how you invest in the future of the country. And whether it's infrastructure or programs or whatever it is, we need to be motivated and need to be excited by this sense of a greater good. It's not enough to just, go from one day to the other and one, election cycle or whatever the timeline is. It's got to be bigger than that. Imagine the people who, and I say this all the time, I'm sure my friends are tired of it. Imagine that we're going to build a railroad across the country.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to go, are you fucking crazy?
Yeah.
Look at that. Look at the Seaway. Look at these things that some of those power projects, hydroelectric projects, those massive undertakings that, to your point, the people who thought about them were long gone by the time the power started flowing down the hydro lines or whatever the issue is. So that to me, I think it's important, and we've got to remind ourselves, and we've got to remind others who are there to serve us that needs to be front and center in their brains, as opposed to just the next transactional thing that they think is important. Anyway, I'm getting political, but I don't want to, because it's not a political show. But
No.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. We've had a politician on, so and we're going to get a few more, but.
Mark, there's no doubt you left the Navy better than you found it. You left the Canadian Armed Forces better than you found it. You were a true leader of the institution that it was. What is it of the other sides of your life that add to the mosaic, to the puzzle? You say that you're an avid biker. What piece of the puzzle does that add?
Oh yeah. So it's the issue of balance, physical balance and mental balance. It's just to have something that's completely unrelated to what I was doing or at any particular moment in time. So, and everybody has their own thing. That some people are, they're really handy, woodworking. Some people, it's a more intellectual pursuit. They read, whatever. But to have something that allows your brain to disengage from the thinking of the moment, and it's basically a break. We used to joke at sea. You go take a shower and have a hot meal, and it's like, you've just unplugged, and it's as if you got 6 hours worth of rest. Now you can't do that continuously, but the point is just get away and do things. So for me, working on old cars, I've always loved that. I've always been really excited and passionate about cars. And so to have an old car that I can just go in the garage and play with for hours, that to me is therapeutic. Cycling is good because it gives you the physical aerobic benefit, plus it's just a completely different mindset. And mountain biking in particular, you can't take your mind off what you're doing. 2 seconds and you're in a tree.
Mark, it's funny. I was in Wasaga Beach one time riding a bike on the boardwalk, took my mind off, stared at something on the beach, and fell off the boardwalk into a pile of bushes. So this little collaboration with Alan's bringing back memories from 30 years ago. But anyway.
Nobody saw it though, Jerry. It
No.
was
For those who want to know, that Wasaga Beach is when we were in Borden, Alan, everyone used to go to Wasaga Beach.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mark, do you bike? Are you a solo guy or do you like to go with a group?
no.
Or?
I have a really good biking buddy. He's another retired naval officer. You may know Serge Bertrand. I don't know if you
Oh,
know
of
Serge.
course,
Yeah.
I know Serge. Yeah.
Looks very much like you. Very distinguished, white hair, beard, and yeah, we just got into it a few years ago. Ron Lloyd, me, Gilles Couturier, a bunch of us. We used to ride to work when we weren't on the bus.
Yeah.
And then we just kept doing it. And I'll ride solo every once in a while, just because I enjoyed it, but it's not the same. It's nice to share that experience with somebody. Bev rides too. She's not as ambitious as we are. She would say that she rides for pleasure, not for pain, which is what we tend to do, either because we fall off or we just push ourselves. But no, it's
Mark,
good.
Ottawa has very, very good biking system. I know on Sundays, I believe the city virtually shuts down in certain areas. Is that where you bike, or do you take your mountain bike to dirt paths?
Yeah, so both. You're right. So we're spoiled here. It's unbelievable.
It's amazing.
At last count, I think it's just under 500 kilometers of either paved or gravel trails in Ottawa, Gatineau, accessible. Of course, since the pandemic, there's been a lot more people getting into cycling, and they tend to be busier. And yes, they shut down a lot of what are called the parkways, which are kind of the double lane main thoroughfares around the city on Saturdays and Sundays, and allow people to just get out and ride their bikes. Still, yes. And then on the mountain biking side, there's a lot of trails around. We're lucky. We've got the Gatineau Hills. Some of the ski hills have mountain biking trails and stuff. So it really is a biker's heaven. And it's back to Newfoundland. It's something that I know there's pockets, but Newfoundland could be a cycler's paradise. I know PEI is a cycler's paradise.
Yeah.
But there's lots of opportunity there.
Yeah. Back to Serge Bertrand there, Mark. He too, I would consider a mentor. When I was a young sub-lieutenant on Athabascan back in the late 80s, probably too excited about the Navy, if I'm to be honest. Serge would often take me aside and give me a nice talking to in a very
fatherly way.
Yeah, in a very fatherly way. And I'm not joking. I always had a great deal of respect for Serge because of those days. He just had a way about him that he made you feel very comfortable, yet he was giving you advice and it was in a way that you wanted to accept it. So I'm glad that you're still biking with Serge, and please pass on my best to him. What is it about? Yeah. What is it about the cars?
Yeah, Alan, before you go into that, it's funny, when you're talking, and I reflect a lot. We're both very lucky to have had the leaders that we had, because, exuberant young 17, 18-year-olds bursting free from the bounds of the rock, so to speak. We're lucky we had the people, and I'm reflecting on a lot of these people. But anyway, go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, solid leaders we had, and we were very fortunate. What is it about the cars that you find so therapeutic? Do you get in there and what is it about that? Because I like driving them. I certainly can't fix them.
I think it's just a infatuation with the engineering and the artistry. You look at, and I'm kind of a 60s, 70s guy because of my childhood.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, my father was an Army officer. One of the great opportunities we had when I was a young child was living in England. And so, I just remember driving around with them and making games out of, recognizing the different cars and what it was. And so, of course, they're ingrained in my memory from that period. And I'm sure people of different generations have their own experience. but I just, when you think about it, it's all done by hand, right? Like there was no computers, there was no CAD, there was no, it was all drawn out and modeled in clay and engineering. And sure, look, at the end of the day, modern technology is a significant improvement in many respects, but it just the ability to get it, and you can fix it. Whether you need to or want to, one would argue really it's a good thing you can, because you need to, because the older ones break down more often. But I think that's it. I think it's just the simplicity. And when I started in the Navy as a reservist, I was a mechanic. So and I only did it for a couple of years, and then I went down the officer route. But maybe that was part of it. I just developed an appreciation for the mechanical side of things.
So now, Mark, you're on to another part of your journey. You're continuing to contribute. You're continuing to contribute to the country in many respects, for sure. And one of the things that I read recently was that you thought you considered yourself with you had a lot of options, and of course you would have a lot of options. And you said that with a lot of options comes responsibility. Can you speak to that for me?
Yeah. So notwithstanding how I got where I am, I do have the luxury of options. Like I don't have to work. I could ride my bike every day for the rest of my life, or as long as I'm healthy, and I wouldn't have to. So it was an issue of, well, what are the things then that I would choose to do that would give me the opportunity to make a difference for somebody else. And so, I picked 2 or 3 things now. The first one was the Royal Canadian Navy Benevolent Fund. So you're probably familiar with it, but it was established in 1942. And fundamentally, it was all about creating a mechanism by which sailors could contribute to help sailors and their families who needed help. And over the life of the fund, it's started to look after veterans and extended families, and there's some academic programs associated with it. But it's a going concern. It's coming up on. We're going to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the fund next year, and so we've got some really exciting plans for that. And so I agreed to join them and help them as a champion. So I'm basically a brand ambassador, for lack of a better term, and give them free advice, which is worth everything they pay for it, and then help them get the word out. And we're going to be doing a lot of that over the next 12 months or so. So that was the first one. The second one was an opportunity in the U.S. to just do something that was totally unrelated to the military. And then this most recent one, which got some attention, was to join a consulting firm where there's a couple of really interesting companies that are trying to get up and running. They have some incredible technology, some really powerful intellectual property, and they're just looking to get a footprint and sink their teeth into potential market opportunities. And so when I was approached to do that, I said, hey, that's good. I mean, I can help, I think. And it's their Canadian company. They want to work on the global stage, and they will contribute in a positive way to the security of Canadians. So from my perspective, it's wins all around. And that's partly why I agreed to do it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Mark, you've always been the type of guy that will get behind a cause. And even when it was our little band in the Navy, Executive Curl, you were the first one. You were always there to support. And I know that that's a small thing, but it meant a great deal to us, right? That you were there to support us. And that's the way that you approach a lot of things in your life. And I think it's just fantastic. We always ask, our guests to leave the audience with a takeaway. Your journey has been incredible. You've had a wonderful go. What would that piece of advice be to the audience?
Be comfortable with yourself. Be honest with yourself. You know, a lot of people are struggling with a variety of challenges. Some of them physical, some of them mental, and you know, one of the most important step in moving forward is recognizing that, you know, you've got a problem, and that problem could in fact be beyond your own ability to deal with. And so this is all about, you know, having the courage to be honest to yourself and say, whatever the issue is, it doesn't have to be a problem, but typically it's a good place to start. And you know, as the saying goes, you know, don't you're not going to have a good relationships with the people in your life if you're not being honest with yourself, because by extension you're being dishonest with them, or you're just misleading them or bullshitting them, or whatever the case may be. So it's not a negative. I don't want to end it on a negative, because I think it's a really powerful mechanism. It's more than a tool. It really allows you to kind of look at things more openly and more honestly. If you just sort of, and there's a humility that comes from that. And I think, you know, that's always been something that I've been motivated by. Don't take yourself too seriously. My wife and daughter remind me of that regularly. Not so much anymore, because now I'm just, you know, the guy hanging around the house. No, that's not true. But yeah, don't take yourself too seriously, and just kind of be as human as you possibly can, no matter what the job is that you're doing, whether you're in charge of 10,000 people or you're just getting yourself out of bed in the morning and focused on what the world is throwing at you. Be honest with yourself. You know, be proud of who you are, but don't wear your pride in an obnoxious or over the top way. Let other people tell you what a great person you are, but you got to tell yourself you're a good person in order to get things moving. That's a long and rambling. That was a tough question, and you told me you were going to ask that question, and I never had a chance to think about my answer.
Yeah,
you bugger.
Well, that was a great. Jerry, your final thoughts.
Well, it's funny, Mark. I always like having a pen in my hand. Alan doesn't need it, but I write notes and things. There's so many things in here that you said, you know, don't try too hard, don't overplay your hand. I love how you rationed your optimism for work, the personal versus the professional side, which is really difficult, but, you know, leaving the campsite better, being comfortable with yourself, and humility. You know, business has an ability to humiliate, actually, in many ways. And that's partly why I actually like business, because you don't get too ahead of yourself. Every day, something will come up to bring you back to earth. But it's obvious from this conversation that you're an incredibly engaging leader. I would love to chat for another hour. And I think what we should do, Alan, is invite Mark back in a year's time, you know, and see how things are going then. Thanks, Mark.
Well, maybe
I'd love to come back. And Jerry, I'm gonna look you up next time I'm on the Rock, and hopefully we'll all be pandemic free by then, and we can.
I've been vaccinated.
Right, we can share a pint somewhere. And
Yes.
Al, man, oh man, can't tell you how proud I am of you. Well done. This is a great venture you two have got going here, and I'm privileged to have played a part in it. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, there you go, folks. Just another wonderful episode of Gale Force Wins, and what a pleasure it was to have Admiral Mark Norman join the show. Now, here's a guy who really doesn't take himself too seriously and has gone on to lead one of this country's greatest institutions, Canadian Armed Forces, now on to an next journey in consulting and giving back into charitable organizations. And that all comes because he's got a good, solid foundation. His dad and his mom showed him the pathway. He showed others the pathway. He's got a solid foundation at home. Good Newfoundland wife, keep him grounded. We all need that. And Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. And I'm going to leave the audience with my own piece of advice, and that is the world needs more Mark Norman. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Al. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Wins. That's Gale Force Wins, WINS.com.